this story will not put you to sleep, I am not sure what will. The bubonic plague is a notorious and deadly epidemic that caused widespread mortality and deeply altered entire societies. Hello again. My name is Nicole, and this is the Sleep Story Channel. Tonight, we explore a meticulous account of the plague that swept across continents in ages past, with its high fevers, swollen glands, and unrelenting fatality. While you are still awake, please subscribe to my channel so that you may continue to receive these unhurried journeys through history. Do not be afraid if you begin to nod off. That is precisely the point of this narrative. Here we go. Chapter 1. What is the bubonic plague? The bubonic plague is a specific epidemic disease that has long been recognized for its uniquely fatal effects. In earlier times, any contagious and deadly epidemic was termed a plague. However, in modern usage, the expression is reserved exclusively for the infectious disease that is marked by a high fever and a distinct inflammation of the lymphatic glands. These swollen lymph nodes, which often become painfully enlarged, gave the disease its name. Classical medical texts in Sanskrit refer to the affliction with names that suggest deep-seated inflammation, while ancient Greek and later medical writings also provide synonyms that illustrate the same dreadful condition. An eminent medical writer named Cantley alike described the disease as an acute febrile illness with widespread inflammation of numerous lymph glands, accompanied by severe disturbances in both the brain and blood vessels. In this description, the underlying causative agent was understood to be a specific bacterium. The explanation is clinical and exact, leaving little room for ambiguity regarding the nature of this malady. Every sentence in this account underlines how the plague uniquely affects the human body with relentless ferocity. Chapter 2. Its history. Historical records of the plague trace its footsteps across several ancient civilizations. The disease appears as far back as the scriptures of both Hindu and Christian traditions. Long before the Common Era, its presence was noted in cities of ancient Greece, where it famously targeted the town of Piraeus over a sustained period. Renowned ancient centers such as Egypt, Syria, Constantinople, and Rome all witnessed the impact of this disease. In one instance in Constantinople, the epidemic was so overwhelming that during the course of a mere 3 months, the daily death toll ranged from 5,000 to 10,000 lives. The earliest historical reference is attributed to Rufus, a physician during the reign of the Emperor Trajan, who alluded to noticeable glandular swellings as signs of this catastrophic malady. In the middle of the 14th century, the plague swept across almost every European country, where some scholars estimate that as many as 25 million persons lost their lives. Even nations such as Ireland encountered this scourge, with accounts of a single week in which 9,000 individuals perished in one locality near Dublin. The epidemic did not spare England, a realm that reportedly suffered through no fewer than 18 distinct outbreaks, before the infamous outbreak of the year 1665. Additional historical instances include the devastation of Marseille in the year 1720, which claimed approximately 40,000 souls from a total of 90,000 residents. In the year 1751, Constantinople experienced an outbreak that resulted in 150,000 deaths. The French military, during its campaign in the year 1799, fell prey to this dreadful illness in Syria, while further outbreaks affected Malta in the year 1813 and Alexandria in the year 1834 through 35. The disease also left its mark on northern India, particularly at Kumaon, when it recurred repeatedly during the 19th century, where it was locally known by a native name that translates roughly as the Great Plague. Historical reports even mention that the island of Kutch witnessed an outbreak starting in the year 1815, with the epidemic lingering until the year 1821. Later in the 19th century, the plague was known to affect areas in Jhansi, Bareilly, Pali, and Jodhpur. In China, plague epidemics had become part of the recurring cycle of infection. The year 1894 witnessed the loss of approximately 60,000 lives in Canton. The disease then spread to Hong Kong and Amoy the following year. These events, tied together by precise dates and locales, attest to the plague's enduring presence in the annals of history and its tragic impact on whole communities. Chapter 3: The London Epidemic of 1665. In the great capital of England, an outbreak of the bubonic plague reached such proportions that it has become emblematic of its terror. An illuminating account of this epidemic is found in the work of a medical practitioner named Nathaniel Hodges, who was a fellow of the esteemed College of Physicians, and whose work remains a detailed record of the catastrophe that befell London during that period. In earlier records maintained by the Royal College of Physicians, one doctor was celebrated for his steadfast service during the time of crisis, for he famously remained at his post throughout the epidemic, and even received a measure of remuneration from the City of London for his unceasing service to the afflicted populace. The account details the manner in which the plague appeared almost suddenly in a family in Westminster, with a few members dying swiftly from mysterious symptoms that were later attributed to the disease. This small outbreak soon became the kernel of a sweeping contagion that spread through the city because the initial cases were not properly contained. A change in the weather, particularly the onset of a harsh frost that lasted for 3 months, temporarily held the death toll in check. However, the disease merely lay dormant, only to surge with renewed vigor once the cold abated, marking its notorious comeback in mid-December during the Christmas holidays. One illustrative instance relayed that a young man experienced the early signs of the plague in the form of high fever and distinctive swellings, described in vivid imagery that compared them to the size of a nutmeg. Authorities, having recognized the disease in its early stages, issued orders for the confinement of affected households. Infected properties were marked with a red cross and de facto sealed off to prevent further spread, with designated guards ensuring that food and medicine were delivered to the sick without allowing them to leave the confinement. Despite such strenuous measures, the epidemic continued to rage on, even as some attempted to escape the city. Medical professionals, as well as laypersons, made heroic though desperate efforts to contain the outbreak. Accounts of rogue attendants and nurses further illustrate the desperate measures and sometimes unscrupulous behavior that arose in the milieu of widespread fear. By the time the epidemic had reached the height of its fury, it is reported that in certain weeks, as many as 8,000 individuals perished. This chapter of London's history remains a sober reminder of the human cost of the plague and the complexities inherent in its management. Chapter 4: Geographical distribution of the disease. The bubonic plague has been known to afflict populations in 3 major continents, namely Europe, Asia, and Africa. Notably, it has not been recorded as far as the Western Hemisphere. In scholarly opinion, Mesopotamia has been regarded as the probable cradle of this malady. The disease has been documented to penetrate even into the far northern territories, reaching as high as Astrakhan in Asia and parts of Norway in Europe. However, in the latter 50 years leading up to recent times, the epidemic has been largely confined to the Asiatic region, stretching from the Red Sea along one flank to the shores of the Pacific in another. Certain experts speculate that the infection may have embarked on a long journey starting from the high plains of Himalayan India, crossing over the plateau of Tibet, and entering into Chinese territories through Yan'an, before eventually making its way to the southern seaboard by maritime routes. This journey, if traced accurately by scholars, would have spanned a period of roughly 20 years between the years 1876 and 1896. The geographical spread of the plague is therefore not random, but rather follows distinct routes that are defined by trade, travel, and environmental conditions. Such patterns continue to underline the critical role that human movement and environmental factors play in the diffusion of highly contagious diseases. Chapter 5: Causes of the epidemic. Early explanations for the plague often turned to mysticism and the wrath of deities as the underlying cause of such a devastating epidemic. In ancient times, when scientific understanding was limited, the disease was frequently interpreted as divine punishment for human sins. Supernatural, astrological, and even rational explanations were evoked to account for its occurrence. By the 14th century, some learned physicians in Paris attributed the outbreak to cosmic influences originating in distant lands such as India. With time, however, more natural and scientific interpretations took root. In Egypt, decomposing animal carcasses were believed to give rise to the disease, while others thought that contamination of the water supply was responsible. It was also suggested that excessive heat, excessive rainfall, damp grain, and even the absence of seasonal winds could incite the plague. Modern investigators eventually recognized that the disease could be explained in terms of a specific organism that required particular environmental conditions for growth. The prevailing view that emerged was that the plague was the result of the implantation of a unique germ that finds fertile ground in unsanitary and crowded settings. In other words, where filth and disarray predominate, the conditions are ideal for the propagation of the lethal bacteria. This understanding is supported by the historical pattern of the disease, which recurrently erupted in conditions of poverty, overcrowding, and a lack of adequate sanitation. Even today, it remains evident that the microscopic agents behind the plague thrive in environments that are poorly maintained and full of organic decay. Chapter 6. The role of the bacillus. Scientific research into the causes of the plague led to the discovery of a specific bacterium that is responsible for the disease. This germ was first detected during an outbreak in Hong Kong by a distinguished Japanese bacteriologist who had previously worked alongside a famous German microbiologist. The bacteriologist employed experimental techniques to demonstrate that injecting the discovered bacteria into susceptible animals would produce symptoms similar to those observed in human cases. Almost contemporaneously, another researcher working under independent circumstances identified the same bacterium. Based on modern bacteriological understanding, these microscopic rods are now considered the precise toxins that give rise to the characteristic clinical signs observed in the plague. The bacteria in question are found in the blood, in the swollen lymph glands, and indeed in most of the vital organs of those who succumb to the disease. They are small rod-like structures with rounded ends. In special staining procedures using aniline dyes, the bacilli reveal a distinct clear band in their middle, which distinguishes them from other types of bacteria. Moreover, they move very little, if at all, in culture. Experiments have shown that these germs can survive for several days when exposed to high temperatures, although they lose their viability with prolonged heat or when subjected to specific chemical disinfectants, such as a 1% solution of carbolic acid or lime water. The cultivation of these bacteria in the laboratory requires a nutritive medium that is carefully prepared from natural sources, thereby allowing the organism to multiply in a controlled environment. The identification of this bacterium marked a crucial turning point in the history of infectious disease research. Chapter 7. The contagious and infectious nature of the plague. The mode by which the plague spreads is one of its most alarming features. Empirical observations have consistently shown that the disease can transfer directly from one individual to another through close and direct contact. When a case of the plague is noted within a family, the other members of that household are rendered especially vulnerable to the infection. Those who visit the affected household, including medical practitioners and attendants, are also at heightened risk of acquiring the disease. Historical episodes, such as those recorded in an epidemic in Hong Kong, provide evidence that despite sympathetic care, certain medical professionals contracted the infection, whereas others, by virtue of their cautious behavior, remained unaffected. In one notable case, during an Egyptian outbreak, a French doctor took an audacious risk by wearing the clothing of a patient who had died of the plague, yet did not fall ill. Other documented examples from later epidemics, including those on the Bombay Peninsula, further underline the role of contagion in the spread of this fatal disease. The Chinese, too, presented a unique insight into the spread of the plague. They held the view that the infection originates in the soil and initially attacks small animals that dwell close to the ground. As these animals, such as rats, become infected, the disease then ascends the food chain to affect creatures with higher respiratory or anatomical positioning, eventually reaching human beings. In many instances, the appearance of death among the rat population served as an early warning of an imminent outbreak among people. The firm linkage between a decline in the health of rodents and the appearance of human cases highlights the importance of environmental factors in the transmission of the disease. Furthermore, contamination may occur through the inhalation of dust laden with the infective agent, through the consumption of food or beverages adulterated with contaminated materials, or even through direct inoculation via skin abrasions. Articles and substances that have been in contact with the bodily secretions of infected persons can also serve as vehicles for the spread of the disease. This complex interplay of direct contagion and environmental transmission marks the bubonic plague as a uniquely challenging disease to control. Chapter 8. The characteristics of a plague epidemic. A defining trait of the bubonic plague is its remarkably slow progression across regions. The disease does not spread with great rapidity. Instead, it takes several weeks to move from one quarter of a city to another. Historical records indicate that it took approximately 9 months for the epidemic to extend from London to the district known as Soho, and an even longer period of 10 months for the illness to travel from Hong Kong to Macau, covering a distance of roughly 30 miles. During the initial stages of the outbreak, isolated cases appear within a restricted geographical area, often confined to a single neighborhood. Such cases precede a phase when the epidemic escalates into a full-blown outbreak that can last several weeks or even stretch over many months in a sporadic manner. In certain climates, such as in Mesopotamia, the activity of the plague diminished when the weather grew excessively hot, only to resurface in winter as the cold retreated and the spring advanced. This seasonal pattern is mirrored in historical accounts from Egypt and in contrasting outbreaks in Constantinople and England. For instance, in the English context, the month of September frequently emerged as the period during which the disease was most prevalent. Other external factors, including famines and climatic anomalies, sometimes coincided with record-breaking outbreaks of the plague. It is evident that environmental, climatic, and socio-economic conditions collectively contribute to the rise, persistence, and eventual decline of the epidemic in any given locality. Chapter 9. The incubation period. The interval between initial infection and the appearance of symptoms in the case of the plague is generally a matter of several days. In most instances, a period of 3 to 6 days elapses between the time of infection and when symptoms become manifest. However, under certain circumstances, this latent period may extend up to 10 days. The variability in the incubation period is thought to depend primarily on the virulence of the strain of the bacterium involved. Intriguingly, the infective germs are capable of remaining viable in the environment for prolonged durations. There exists an account of an individual who, after handling ropes that had been used in the burial of plague victims 2 decades earlier, subsequently contracted the disease and died. Such evidence underscores the resilience of the plague bacillus and the potential for very prolonged periods of infectivity under favorable conditions. Chapter 10. The symptomatology. The early manifestations of the plague typically involve non-specific symptoms that may initially be mistaken for less serious conditions. Individuals often experience an intense headache, a marked loss of appetite, a general sense of depression, and aching of the limbs. These prodromal signs may emerge either in a mild form or in an extremely aggravated and severe fashion. As the disease takes an upward turn, a progressive rise in body temperature is observed, often reaching levels of 104, 105, or even 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Some extreme cases have even been recorded with temperatures reaching 108 degrees Fahrenheit. In many instances, there is a fluctuating pattern where the temperature falls in the morning and exacerbates as the day proceeds, a phenomenon that may be taken as a favorable sign. Within a few hours to a few days of the initial fever, a painful and conspicuously swollen gland emerges, most commonly in the region of the groin, although swellings may also appear in the neck or underarm regions. In children, swelling of the cervical lymph nodes is particularly common. As the disease develops, there may be increasingly severe neurological disturbances. Patients are known to exhibit signs of delirium that may range from a state of stupor to one of wild agitation that interrupts rational thought. Many patients eventually lapse into a deep, prolonged state of unconsciousness. Additional complications arise when the disease begins to affect other organ systems. In some cases, the gastrointestinal tract becomes involved, leading to either severe constipation or less frequently diarrhea, and the respiratory system may show signs of distress in the form of labored breathing. The full syndrome of the plague, therefore, unfolds as a progressive and multi-system disorder that ultimately leads to collapse of cardiac activity and other vital functions. The manifestation of these symptoms, with each passing stage, marks a distinct phase in the deadly progression of the illness. Chapter 11. Variants of the disease. Not all manifestations of the plague follow the same pattern. Prior to the onset of a full-blown epidemic, there are usually isolated cases of milder glandular swellings accompanied by low-grade fever. In some regions, particularly in the Northern Territories, such as Astrakhan, these milder cases have been referred to by names that distinguish them from the classical form of the illness. There exists an ambulatory variety of the disease in which the infected individual experiences only minor symptoms, despite the presence of the infective bacteria in the bloodstream. Ultimately, 3 broad categories have been recognized in the medical literature. One variant is the fulminant type, which is characterized by an extremely rapid course that leaves little time for intervention. Another is the typical form, which follows the classical progression described by attending physicians. The third is now commonly known as the minor type of the disease, which may include the ambulatory cases that are less severe in their clinical presentation. Although the mild forms rarely lead to death, they serve as a critical reminder that the bacterium responsible for the plague can exist in a variety of manifestations. Chapter 12. The challenges of diagnosis. Differentiating a bona fide case of the plague from other illnesses that present with similar early signs is an issue of considerable difficulty. The initial symptoms of the plague, particularly in its early stages, are not distinctive enough to allow for a confident diagnosis based solely on clinical examination. A case in point is the overlap between early plague symptoms and those of benign viral fevers or even other conditions that cause lymph node enlargement, such as mumps. Experienced medical practitioners have reported that, at times, careful scrutiny of a patient's facial expression and overall appearance may provide useful clues. In one notable instance, an apparently typical case was later found to be due to a parasitic infection after further examination of the patient's urine and blood. The potential for misdiagnosis is complicated further by the fact that the clinical presentation of the plague may at one time closely resemble that of typhus, although there are distinguishing features, such as the characteristic rash of typhus. Doctors have sometimes observed cases in which the typical signs of one disease seem to alternate or mix. Thus, the responsibility in the early diagnosis of plague rests heavily on the ability of the medical practitioner to rapidly isolate and examine the patient, thereby ensuring that doubtful cases are managed with the utmost precaution. Chapter 13. Prognosis and mortality. The outcome of plague infection is grim in many instances. Recorded data from historical outbreaks indicate that the mortality rate can be as high as 90% or even more when the epidemic is at its height. In the early phases and toward the tail end of an epidemic, when the overall intensity of the disease is somewhat diminished, the fatality rate tends to be lower. In documented cases, for example in Bombay, the average mortality rate was found to be approximately 84%, while in Karachi, the rate soared to nearly 89%. It has been observed that children and elderly individuals tend to have a worse prognosis compared to healthy adults. Certain clinical signs, such as the prompt appearance of a single swollen lymph node, or a distinct pattern of morning and evening variations in fever, seem to offer a slightly better chance of recovery. On the other hand, when the disease takes a rapid turn towards complications, such as conspicuous suppuration of multiple lymph glands, hemorrhagic manifestations, or central nervous system involvement, the likelihood of survival diminishes dramatically. The high mortality figures and the rapid deterioration seen in the most severe cases underscore the ruthless nature of this epidemic disease. Chapter 14. Microscopic and macroscopic findings. In autopsy studies and post-mortem examinations, the plague reveals a number of characteristic findings. The infective bacilli are typically found throughout the body, particularly in the blood and in the enlarged lymphatic tissues. The spleen is often noted to be markedly enlarged and congested, and similar changes are observed in the liver and kidneys. The body does not usually exhibit extreme emaciation prior to the onset of decomposition. Instead, the process of decomposition begins rapidly, accompanied by distinct hemorrhagic spots on the skin. The brain, along with its protective membranes, is often noted to be engorged with blood. In the gastrointestinal tract, hemorrhagic patches may be present, and the internal lymphatic chains can be seen to be infiltrated with a clear, reddish fluid. Each of these findings has been carefully documented over the years and serves as a microscopic signature of the plague within the human body. The detailed pathological examination of these features continues to provide insight into the manner in which the bacterium exerts its destructive influence. Chapter 15. Preventative measures. In view of the extraordinary lethality and rapid spread of the plague, efforts to prevent its advent have focused upon two principal strategies. One strategy is to intercept the bacterium before it is introduced into an unaffected population. This requires diligent inspection of individuals individuals arriving from areas known to be afflicted, as well as the rigorous enforcement of quarantine measures. Even articles that could potentially harbor the infection, such as clothing, bedding, or personal belongings, must be carefully inspected and, if necessary, isolated. The other strategic focus is to render the local environment inhospitable to the growth and propagation of the infective bacteria. This is achieved by maintaining high standards of sanitation and personal hygiene. Improvement in the overall cleanliness of the environment not only reduces the likelihood that the bacteria will take hold, but also serves to diminish the already favorable conditions that facilitate the disease. Historical evidence clearly demonstrates that the plague has consistently appeared in regions where there is a chronic state of filth, overcrowding, poor ventilation, and accumulation of decaying organic matter. In essence, prevention rests on the dual approach of avoiding the introduction of the pathogen into a community and modifying the environmental conditions to discourage the spread of the disease should the bacteria be present. Chapter 16. Sanitary measures by municipal and railway authorities. Municipal administrators and public officials have long recognized that the battle against the plague must be fought on the side of sanitation. Urban authorities have embarked upon extensive programs of cleaning that target the removal of filth from towns and villages. Every effort is made to eliminate all forms of garbage and refuse from residential areas. In addition, both private and public latrines, as well as communal urinals, are subjected to daily cleaning and disinfection routines. Recognizing the importance of proper drainage, municipal officers ensure that all drains are regularly flushed with disinfectant solutions. In cities that are served by underground sewer systems, these too are monitored closely, with periodic cleaning and thorough disinfection forming part of the routine maintenance. Railway authorities play a similar role in protecting public health. All railway carriages that traverse regions known to be affected by the plague are washed daily with reliable disinfectant agents. Platforms, waiting rooms, and public restrooms found at railway stations are likewise subject to regular cleaning procedures. Such measures, though often tedious and exhaustive, form the backbone of a comprehensive public health strategy designed to prevent the spread of the plague in densely populated urban centers and along busy transportation routes. Chapter 17. Private hygiene. In addition to public measures, great emphasis is placed on the role of individual behavior in combating the spread of the disease. Every household is encouraged to maintain high standards of personal and domestic cleanliness. Homes and compounds, including stables, kitchens, and outbuildings, must be kept immaculate. Whitewashing walls with lime is strongly advised as a means of inhibiting the growth of the infective bacteria. It is essential that any form of refuse is prevented from accumulating within the residential environment. Individuals are urged to perform daily cleansing routines that include regular bathing and thorough washing of the hands and mouth before and after each meal. Clothing, especially items that have been handled by others or come from communal washing facilities, should be boiled, thoroughly dried, and only then put back into use. Food items are treated with similar caution. Raw vegetables are to be washed meticulously and prepared only with care, and all edible articles are stored securely to avoid contamination by pests. As a further precaution, The care of those who are attending plague cases is governed by stringent guidelines. Individuals who come into contact with infected persons are advised to wash their hands immediately using disinfectant solutions, and even subject any exposed skin to an antiseptic bath. In environments where the plague is active, it is imperative that every personal habit be scrutinized in order to prevent the introduction or spread of infection within the sanctum of the home. Chapter 18. Inoculation against the plague. Amidst the rising hopes offered by new scientific developments, experimental approaches to immunization against the plague have been introduced. A renowned researcher, well known for his work in inoculating against cholera, ventured into the realm of plague prevention using principles similar to those applied in his earlier work. By injecting an attenuated form of the infective agent into the body, he was able to stimulate a very mild disease in the recipient. This controlled case was observed to provoke an immune response that, it was believed, might protect the individual from the more virulent strains of the bacteria. Although the procedure remains at an experimental stage and is not yet ready for widespread public application, it has garnered considerable interest as a potential method to protect those who are most vulnerable. At present, it is recommended primarily for medical personnel, nurses, and others who are repeatedly exposed to infected cases. In similar lines of research, another scientist has claimed that his serum prophylaxis may offer comparable preventive benefits. Although much remains to be determined, the early experiments in inoculation have shown promising results and represent one of the more progressive approaches in the long-standing struggle against the plague. Chapter 19. Treatment protocols. Once a patient is diagnosed with the plague, a multifaceted treatment regimen is initiated that encompasses both hygienic and pharmacological interventions. The first step in managing the condition is to isolate the patient immediately and ensure that the environment in which the patient is kept is strictly controlled. The patient is confined to bed and placed in a room that is well ventilated and maintained at a temperature within a narrow range that is conducive to recovery. Measures are taken to keep the space free from any materials such as curtains, carpets, or other fabrics that might harbor the infectious agents. The bedclothes are washed meticulously each day using disinfectant solutions, and every effort is made to prevent the circulation of contaminated air within the patient's vicinity. The physician advises absolute bed rest and gentle handling at all times, recognizing that even small physical exertions might worsen the patient's already fragile condition. In this critical stage, the primary goal is to support the patient's weakened body by ensuring that the environment is as antiseptic and comfortable as possible. Once the hygienic aspects have been addressed, attention turns toward meeting the nutritional and metabolic needs of the patient. The dietary regimen recommended at this early juncture consists predominantly of liquid nourishment. Milk is regarded as the ideal aliment in that it is both nutritive and easily digested. Adults are typically given no less than 3 or 4 pints of milk over the course of 24 hours. In some instances, the milk is diluted with a small quantity of soda water or carbonated water to facilitate easy digestion. And in cases where the patient's energy reserves are particularly depleted, additional powdered supplements may be incorporated to enhance its nutritional value. When the patient is unable to consume sufficient milk, a plain meat broth is often substituted. Even a diluted egg flip, with or without a modest quantity of brandy, may be provided as an alternative. The guiding principle in the administration of food is to avoid anything that might otherwise overwhelm the highly compromised digestive system. The danger of accumulating undigested food and the subsequent formation of harmful substances within the intestines is taken very seriously by the attending physicians, who emphasize moderation and regularity in all nutritional intakes. Chapter 20. Approaches to treating symptoms. In conjunction with the overall therapeutic strategy, a range of measures are employed to alleviate the individual symptoms that beset a plague patient. When an elevated body temperature is observed, the patient is treated with antipyretic drugs that are designed to lower the fever, while at the same time stimulating the body in other ways to counteract the onset of shock. There are, for instance, compounds that combine phenacetin with a measured quantity of hydrobromate of quinine that have proven effective in this regard. The treatment regimen also incorporates non-pharmacological methods, such as the application of tepid sponging or gentle dousing with warm liquids. Brandy, which is given in measured amounts, supplements these measures by further promoting a gentle lowering of body temperature. When symptoms implicating the central nervous system become apparent, such as severe headache, restlessness, or a state of delusional confusion, additional remedies are applied. Cool compresses, particularly in the form of ice caps, are placed over the head, and soothing agents are administered to the temples and scalp. In cases where the patient experiences generalized nervous unrest or insomnia without significant depression, mild sedatives such as potassium bromide are considered appropriate. The primary objective in the management of these diverse symptoms is to maintain a delicate balance that neither artificially diminishes the body temperature to an unsafe level, nor suppresses the vital reactions that are necessary to combat the poison. Note that hemorrhagic tendencies, such as vomiting blood or bleeding from other sites, are managed very carefully. In such instances, drugs belonging to the ergot family have been recommended to stem the bleeding both when taken internally and when they are administered by injection beneath the skin. Similarly, when gastrointestinal disturbances such as constipation or diarrhea present in the early stages, appropriate measures, including the administration of small doses of calomel followed by a saline solution, are taken to restore regularity to the bowel functions. Vomiting and even hiccup are alleviated by the application of cool compresses over the abdomen, along with the use of acidulated water that is carefully sweetened with lemon syrup. In cases where the patient lapses into a state of near unconsciousness, emergency measures such as the rapid administration of a cold effusion or the rectal injection of strong coffee have been advocated in order to reverse the declining state of consciousness. Chapter 21: Serum and Antitoxin Treatment. In recent years, a new avenue of treatment, known as serum therapy, has begun to influence the way in which the plague is managed medically. The principles underlying this treatment modality were first demonstrated in connection with diseases such as diphtheria and tetanus by the scientist Pasteur. In the case of the plague, an antitoxin is prepared by immunizing animals against the bacterium responsible for the illness, and then extracting serum from these animals. This serum, when administered to an affected patient, is intended to counteract the toxic products that are being generated by the infective agent. A pioneering physician by the name of Yersin first applied this method in Canton, and subsequent reports, for example from Amoy, indicated that a significant number of patients responded to the treatment with a considerably lower mortality rate. Although the use of serum therapy in the plague is still in a relatively early stage, and the precise therapeutic protocols are subject to ongoing experimentation, there is a widespread belief among the medical community that these approaches hold considerable promise for both the curative and the preventive treatment of the disease. Chapter 22: Methods of Disinfection. The control of the plague does not end with patient management, but also extends vigorously into the realm of disinfection. In the efforts to halt further spread, substances designated as disinfectants are employed extensively with the specific purpose of neutralizing the infective bacteria. Among the most potent of these disinfectants is heat, which is universally recognized as the most powerful agent for the destruction of germs. Items such as clothing, bedding, and other objects that might harbor the infectious agent are subjected to prolonged periods of boiling or exposure to high-pressure steam to render them sterile. In public arenas, particularly in large urban centers and at railway stations, specialized steam disinfection chambers have been installed. These chambers operate on the principle that high-pressure steam, once released in controlled bursts, is capable of achieving deep penetration into fabric and other non-conducting materials. Fumigation is another critical technique that is used frequently. The burning of substances such as sulfur or the application of chlorine gas has been observed to provide an effective means of disinfecting both small enclosed areas and larger public spaces. In numerous instances, large bonfires of sulfur have been deliberately set alight in order to purify the air over the infected zones. Such methods, which might at first appear crude, have consistently demonstrated high efficacy in neutralizing the plague pathogen. Thank you for joining me on this unhurried pilgrimage through history. May this recounting of the plague, filled with its unadorned facts and clinical precision, guide you into a peaceful slumber. Sleep well, and remember that even the dreariest facts from the past carry the seeds of future wisdom and progress.